Hello and welcome to BCE Sport TV. We are bringing the final episode of a Guinness Six Nation talk show. We have a lovely background, of course, our cousin building. What an eventful week for the Guinness Six Nation gentlemen. We didn't expect that sort of physicality from Wales game, especially where they lost just by 4 points first up, Mark.
Yeah, it was really impressive from Wales, in fairness. They were definitely underdogs going into the game. But I don't think any team will go to Cardiff and have it easy. So they really did a number on sort of analysing how France attack, and I think they put their defensive structures into place really well to disrupt a lot of what France did. And I think England will probably learn a lot from what Wales did going into this weekend as well.
How impressed are you with the Wales performance?
Yeah, I thought they did really well. A little bit of a game of, what if. I think Jonathan Davies will be looking back on that dropped inside pass. Just, you've got to take those ultimately, and they'll all know that. And just a real shame because it was a bit of a cliffhanger anyway. Had they scored that, you just really don't know what would have come of it. So I think France had a good test, but probably deserved it slightly in the end.
I mean, that is a very good point you mentioned. This is the difference between the All Blacks or Springboks. So when you give an opportunity, they know how to use that opportunity. But these are cardinal errors.
Yeah, and I think winning is a habit, isn't it? And I think when you look at the All Blacks and look at the sort of really top teams in the world, they win as a habit. And I think that as a result, they just feel confident to take chances, and that is a difference.
It was indeed a very close game. France winning 13 points to 9 over Wales. What impressed you more in terms of Dan Biggar's leadership, Phil?
I think they just took it to them. Do you know what I mean? It would be easy to sit back and go, we've just got to defend for 80 minutes here because France are going to play their power game and their offloading game and everything else. But ultimately, I think they've really just attacked them. They've got on the front foot. They used the ball well. And as Mark said, the kicking made a big difference. That's probably the most balanced kicking game across the Six Nations so far. And I think that the stats afterwards that Wales actually had, I think they were within 50 kicking metres of France. And I mean, we talked about it last week, the balance in how France are playing. They know they want to exit in their half, and they know they want to really focus on their attack and their offloading game in the opposition half. So it's a little bit of a blueprint for England to follow this weekend, which is ironic because England have kind of gone with this, we need a new England and we're going to run from everywhere and attack from everywhere, whereas they probably actually need to go back to the old England, which was get the ball and kick it away and put France under a load of pressure. So it poses some really, really great questions.
According to Sir Clive Woodward, there's no New England for him. We'll talk about Wales versus Italy, which will be played this weekend. Where do you see Wayne P. Wax? If Wales goes through a win, probably they will end up in third on the table.
Yeah, and I think overall Wayne Pivac will be happy with that. I think going into the World Cup next year, there's a lot of rebuilding still to be done in the Welsh team, and a lot of players to come in and up through the squad. It's interesting to see Alan Wyn-Jones coming back for this weekend for his 150th cap, which is great to see him doing that, but at the same time I'm slightly surprised that the likes of Ben Carter haven't been given any minutes during the Six Nations. So, interesting decisions to be made, but there's an eye definitely on next year's World Cup as well as this year's Six Nations.
Well, that's the recap of Wales versus France. What a game at Twickenham. It's always tough to play England at their home den. How impressed are you with that England's 14-men effort?
Yeah, I think they've shown real kind of resilience and dealt with the adversity and the challenge of playing with 14 men for such a long period of time. I think I put this on social media afterwards. I completely disagree with anyone who says that it was unlucky. Like this is the thing. They're professional players. They're not going to get it right all the time, but it's a stonewall red card. Like, you can't tackle like that anymore. Not that you ever really could. So I don't really understand how people are suggesting that poor technique is unlucky. They've dealt with it. I thought the referees and the officials dealt with it really well. It was really clear. Ireland have lost James Ryan, who's one of their best players for the whole game as well. So you've got to look at the consequence of that. But yeah, no, I think it would be easy to get carried away with the kind of fanfare coming out of England. Like, they've still lost, and they still could finish fifth. So I don't think it's a case of getting too carried away in the resilience and the kind of the brilliance of losing a tight game. You could actually say they probably could have kicked on and won it. Like, other than that last kind of 10 minutes where the fatigue and they probably overcommitted to a few breakdowns and different things, I still think they had chances to actually win that game. I think Ireland's quality really showed at the end, and we'd look at the bigger picture. We've talked about the World Cup a lot and the kind of the purpose of this Six Nations in the cycle. Actually, they're the types of games you've got to come away with good wins, because traditionally they haven't. When it's knockout rugby, they've really struggled with that. So to see that ruthlessness, they just sneaked it. I think there would have still been some pretty big questions over Ireland. To really kind of finish off and put England to the sword was impressive.
And obviously losing a player so early on in the game is a massive effect. But it does often galvanise a team, and I think we really saw that with England last week, and I think they will build on that. However, my biggest worry for England is that they've only scored one try in the last two games, and haven't really created a lot. I agree with Phil that I think that the way that they were looking to play isn't necessarily going to be as successful as they might have first thought, and so I think they might have to revert to their more traditional type of play, certainly if they're going to get a win against France.
Well, yeah, it was like 15-all at the 60th minute, and it was like 18-15 in the 70th minute, and the final full-time score doesn't give England any justice according to their performance. But Ellis Genge, known as Baby Rhino, he's no more a Baby Rhino, but he gave Tad Furlong a difficult 80 minutes.
Yeah, and it was interesting again looking at some of the stats and some of the review of the games in terms of some of the decisions that were made by the referee, and I think with a different referee, some of those decisions might have gone the other way, which might have just changed the momentum a little bit. But certainly, Genge is growing in confidence, and he's growing in stature as an international rugby player now, and it's really good to see that he's maturing really well, both on the field and off the field, and England need players like that who are really coming through the system to do that if they're going to have a real solid chance at next year's World Cup.
I don't know what Mark's talking about there. I think the scrum penalties were stonewall penalties to England. There's absolutely no debate. Yeah, absolutely fine.
Of
course.
There's
no question there at all.
Absolutely, indeed. I mean, we witnessed that Itoje was brutal again, and also even Johnny Sexton, the Irish captain, praising Marcus Smith, how well he managed with 14 men.
Yeah, and again, it's another learning experience for Marcus Smith, isn't it? And the steps he keeps taking. I think all of this is just good exposure and good learning from him. Again, an interesting challenge to go to Paris and for him to step up and run that team. It also then makes you kind of question, well, what is the point of George Ford on the bench? So he's been on the kind of the uproar after the Scotland game, where apparently it was George Ford's fault that England fell apart in the last kind of 15-20 minutes. It clearly wasn't, as we discussed. But now he's just a passenger, and you've got probably I would say is a world-class player sat there not being impactful. And actually, I think this has been England's problem for a long time. They've got very good players, but they can't find ways to shoehorn them all in. And the centre partnership is, again, it come back to being another issue. I thought Marchant took a really big step forward at 13. I thought he was impactful, dealt with the Irish centres, who are, again, really high quality centres, dealt with them. But Malins has now been dropped out of the squad to travel to Paris. The chat was this week that Furbank had been running at 15 and Freddie Stewart had been running on the wing. So you just go, well, where's that consistency? Where's their best 7 players putting their hand up in their best 7 positions? And how are they actually forming any kind of cohesion and unity? Because it just keeps being chopped and changed. And I understand there's a need for tactical change and subtle change, but at some point you've got to probably start questioning, do they know who their best squad is? Do they know who their best 7 is?
Yes, it is. So I know for the fact you played as a winger, Mark.
Yes.
Have you ever played in a flanker position, just like Jack Nowell did? How impressed are you with Nowell's performance?
Luckily not, Severe. Luckily not. I mean, he's. I think Eddie Jones had made a comment last year that he'd make a good flanker, and I think he did really well. Certainly better than Johnny May did when Johnny May went in as flanker a couple of years ago. But he's a strong, powerful boy, and he did a really good job. Fair play. I'm sure he wouldn't want to go there again too quickly, though.
Well, there you go. So that's the recap of what happened at Guinness Six Nation Week 4, and we'll talk about the Week 5, the final week, after the break. Welcome back once again. So the final week of Guinness Six Nation will be played this weekend. 3 games in a row. First up, Italy versus Wales at Cardiff. How do you think is that going to be?
Well, I think it's good for Wales that it's at home. In fairness to Italy, this year they put in some really strong performances, and they are developing as a team. And always the big question is when are they going to win a game? Unfortunately, I don't think it'll be this weekend. I think Wales again will be too strong. I think Italy will probably compete for the first 50-60 minutes, and then I think Wales will be too strong at the end. Some people coming back into the Welsh team, and it'll be interesting to see how some of those sort of units go. But I think they'll overall be too strong.
Yeah, it is quite strange, Phil, when you take Italy. They are a team of 60 minutes for the last few Six Nation encounter. But looking at the under-20s, how well they are playing. They beat England. They almost beat Scotland. In fact, they beat Scotland as well. So they will be playing their final game as well. In terms of their pathway, do you think there's positives?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when Conor O'Shea went there, what was that, 5 or 6 years ago? That was the chat. They'd done his homework. He knew what was coming through the pathway. He knew what the talent looked like within the Italian game. He probably didn't really get a chance to harness that maybe as much as he would like. But I also know a lot of his work was done lower down the kind of the performance pathway. So I think they're seeing, reaping the benefits of that. And there's clearly a lot of good coaches and a lot of quality hard work going into developing those players to start, producing better performances. More consistency in their performances at the top end, which is fantastic to see, and everybody wants Italy to be competitive. And I know that it ends up becoming this debate around, is it Italy, is it Georgia, should there be a playoff? I just think we've got to back Italy, and everyone needs to get behind them and really do whatever the World Rugby can or whatever we can to support them to develop that game so they are consistently beating teams, because they've had those one-offs, but they've just not strung that together in quite a while now. But it's a huge challenge to overcome to be at the level these other teams are at.
Wales by 20?
Yeah, I think 15 to 20 by the end of it. I think they'll have it.
I'm going to go upset, just because I'd like to see it, and that's nothing against Wales, but I'd like to see Italy win. So I'm going to go Italy by 2.
I'm not speaking to Phil anymore.
Also, just to give some clarity, Phil is no more a Welsh. He was born in Bath, and it was a Llewellyn. His surname is been for like 8 to 9 generation, if I'm not mistaken. So he talk himself as English. All right, let's move on to the next game. Scotland versus Ireland. It's again Scotland travelling, but they had a difficult time against Italy last week around. And what is surprising is that Finn Russell is dropped for the bench.
Yeah, and I think potentially Scotland were expected to do more this Six Nations, and certainly the way they started against England, we were hoping that this was going to be their sort of consistent year, but they haven't really come through with that, and Finn Russell's performances have probably been linked to that to a certain extent. So in some ways I'm not surprised to see him dropped, but at the same time, can Blair Kinghorn come in and do the same for Scotland's backs as Finn Russell can potentially do? So that's going to be a big challenge for Scotland this week. Ireland have named almost a very similar team that played against England last week, and from my point of view, they're looking very strong again. So for me, especially over in Ireland, I think it's going to be an Ireland win.
Mark is not so surprised with the Finn Russell's drop. Are you surprised?
No. If I'm completely honest, if I think most coaches in the World Rugby would be looking at that, going, at what point is he going to be consistent in his performances? Is that a team issue where he's not on the same page as other people, so he can't perform to his level because other people aren't? Is that a Finn Russell issue? Is that an internal thing where he's not preparing well enough, or he's not in the condition to perform at that level? It could be one, it could be either, it could be both. So no, I'd be less surprised at that, and I think no one should be guaranteed a start, right? Like that's the whole point of having competitive squads, about giving people opportunities. Who is Scotland's? Me and Mark talked about this before we recorded. Like, who is Scotland's number 2 fly half? If Finn goes down in the first minute of the first game of the World Cup, well, who steps in? So, and I think for the general public, and everyone will be invested in these games. I understand that, but I think they've got to recognise from a coaching perspective, they get so little time with these players. They've got three campaigns before the World Cup. So, you finish this, you've got the summer, you've got autumn, you've got next Six Nations, and then they're into it, and they've got to be making decisions, and that is really not a lot of time. Number one, to work out who's in form and who your best team is and who your most cohesive unit is, but also for other people to put their hand up and come through. So I would say now is a great time to do that. If you want to test players, then do it against a good Ireland team in Ireland. You're going to see what they're made of.
Absolutely, yes. And also one injury could even stop you from playing those 3. I hope it won't happen for any any player in terms of where we're concerned. Where do you think the strategy Andy Farrell will opt, especially against Scotland?
Well, I think the one thing Scotland will try and do is try and disrupt. So I think what Ireland will do to counter that is that they will be physical, but I think they will look to continue playing at this tempo that they've really looked to play with over the last few games, and that has been very successful for them. The ball is in the ruck for only a short time, and they get the ball away from there. So I think they will look to continue to do that. Their defence itself is pretty strong, so they will also look to disrupt Scotland's ball as well, and use that as an attacking platform.
When you look at the stats, tackles made, meters gained, and the physical impact on the last game, it is something like England played in the semi-finals against All Blacks, where they didn't have much of stamina, or fatigue was down in terms of going into the final against Springboks. Do you think that will be a nature of impact for Ireland, considering their last performance?
No, I think, you're always going to get a little bit of fatigue going into week 5, I guess. It's back to back. I think every team would have that. If you played the week before, it's a tight turnaround, and there are challenges associated with that. I don't think we're at a point now where that has too much of an impact. I think they can still win it. Do you know what I mean? So there's a huge motivator there. Yes, England need to do Ireland a favour, but there is a huge motivator to still put in a really strong performance. You can't afford to slip up in what is effectively a knockout game, and Scotland aren't going to roll over. We know that. We know they fight really, really well. They're still fighting for that consistency, even if they haven't shown it, which is, again, it becomes more and more of a cliche every year. It's almost kind of which Scotland team is going to turn up now, not which French team. So they showed against England they can perform. So I think for Ireland to underestimate them or start looking for kind of some excuses would do that at their peril.
Finally, on this game, what's your prediction, Mark?
I think Ireland will get a bonus point win, and I think they will win by 10.
Phil?
I'm going to say Ireland by 12.
So Ireland by 10 and Ireland by 12. Let's move on to the next game. Can England do a favour to Ireland? But it does not maybe enough. Ireland have to win. Ireland have to beat Scotland. They are going to be favourites. But where do you think in Paris how the game will flare?
It's interesting, building on the way that Wales played against France last week. But obviously Wales were at home. England have got the additional challenge of going to Paris to try and win that, and obviously the French crowd, if the French play well, when they're on song, the French crowd are tremendous in supporting their team, and so I think it'll be a very different atmosphere for England going to Paris than it was for Wales playing in Cardiff last week. So I think it's going to be very difficult for England. But as well as England will learn some lessons from the way that Wales played, France will also learn some lessons from that game as well. So yeah, it's going to be a fascinating end to the Super Saturday, and I can't see France losing this one.
Well, even just before the Guinness Six Nations, France came as top favourites, and they have showed why they are favourites from week 1 onwards. They have improved only the week 4 against Wales, like Mark said. Where do you see the battle in terms of coaching tactics will play, especially in this game? We know that Eddie is clever in terms of using some tactics, but where do you see anything going to come into?
I guess as we talked about in the preview, I think or the review of last week, I think the kicking game becomes huge. I think the more England can challenge France to kind of play back out of their half, put them under pressure. I think England's defence has remained reasonably consistent. I think they've struggled a little bit against Wales when it kind of gets a little bit loose and a little bit frantic. But actually, putting teams under pressure is going to be a big part of any game. Doing that to France in Paris is a huge challenge. But I feel they've got, as you talked about earlier, in terms of Genge, Itoje, you've got guys there that are going to step up and meet these challenges. They are phenomenal animals, and you've got the same on the French side. So I'm just desperate to see Alfie Barbary come in, to be completely honest. I think he's a one-man wrecking ball. At 12 or in the back row, I'm not fussy. Wherever Eddie wants to pick him. I think without Tom Curry, does Underhill come in? Who goes into that 7 role? It was a real shame that kind of Jack Willis wasn't in a position to kind of be fit enough or have enough minutes to travel with the team, because I think the quality England have in their back row, and it's arguably the same issue with the back line. They've got so many good players, not necessarily world class at the moment, but how do you fit them all in? I'm a big fan of Laws in the second row, if I'm honest. I think he does a good job at 6, but I'd like to see him and Itoje in the row to add that physicality. Obviously, Yules is out, so if it means you can then go with a little bit more of an explosive back row, a little bit faster, play a little bit wider when you need to, I think that's a great way to challenge France and put them on the back foot.
And the selection is going to be really interesting, I think, because as Phil said, they've got plenty of players to choose from. But if Eddie makes changes again, because one of the issues, as we mentioned earlier, that England have had is actually scoring tries. I can't see them winning in France without scoring tries, because I think France will definitely score some. So it's going to be a difficult challenge, I think, for England to go out there.
England finished 5th in last year's Six Nations, and if a loss to France means that they're going to finish on 5th. Where do you see? We see social media comments like Eddie out. Where do you see in terms of RFU take the stance on it?
I would be very surprised if that happened the year before the World Cup, because of all the things that we've talked about over the last few weeks. But it will put him under a lot of pressure, without a doubt. And there will definitely be people calling for that to happen if they do end up for 4th or 5th. Because it will have meant that England have underperformed again. England should really be in the top 2, at least the top 3 every Six Nations. So if they end up 4th or 5th, they will have underperformed again.
Where do you think, Phil, the win and loss will be decided in France?
On the field, I would say. No, I think set piece, you can't ever overlook the set piece. I think France have got an exceptional line out. There's been a lot of talk in the Six Nations around kind of the consistency of England's line out and the quality that's shown. So that will be a real battle. Who can pick some off in the air. Scrum again will be a great challenge, and I genuinely think, as you said, kicking game, but who can get on the front foot the most consistently? If you've got your carriers getting you over the game line and you can play quick ball, any team is going to be dangerous. England haven't done enough of that, as Mark said. That's where you're going to score those tries from. You can't rely on kind of the agility and the pace of Marcus Smith just to create opportunities. There's got to be a little bit more of a cohesive kind of performance there to get England over the whitewash. But they need to come from somewhere.
Well, there you go. And what's your prediction for the weekend?
Again, I think France will have a bonus point win, and I think they'll win by 8.
Phil?
What do I think? I think France will win a Grand Slam. It's been a long time coming. What I like to happen? Biggest performance of England of the year, and they turn them over by 2. So I wouldn't write England off. Put it that way. They could. They have the quality to be able to win. Will they? Probably not. So I'm going to say France by 6.
There you go, France by 6. That is the end of our Guinness Six Nation talk show on BCE Sport TV. Gentlemen, thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure to having you here.
Thank you, Sabir.
Thank you very much for having us. Absolute pleasure.
We'll see you later.